The stars had never looked so bright to Admiral Jake Morrison as they did from the bridge of the UES Vanguard. It was the year 2387 and humanity had spread across 12 star systems like seeds in the wind. Each colony was a beacon of human hope and determination. Jake had spent most of his life watching humanity grow from a single world species to masters of multiple star systems. The communication array crackled to life with an unfamiliar signal. Lieutenant Susan Davis turned from her station with wide eyes. The signal was not from any human colony or ship. It came from deep space and carried patterns unlike anything in their databases. Jake felt his heart race as he realized what this meant. After centuries of searching the stars for other intelligent life, humanity had finally found it, or perhaps it had found them. The signal grew stronger over the next 3 days. Jake ordered the fleet to hold position while scientists worked to decode the message. Dr. Kevin Walsh led the translation team from his laboratory aboard the research vessel UES Discovery. Kevin was a thin man with careful eyes who had spent years studying the possibility of alien contact. Now that possibility had become reality. The message was surprisingly simple once decoded. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Confederation, and they came in peace. They had been watching humanity for some time and were impressed by their rapid expansion across the galaxy. The Zephyrians wanted to meet and discuss mutual cooperation between their civilizations. Jake felt excitement, mixed with caution in his chest. First contact was the dream of every space explorer, but it also carried enormous risks. The aliens could be exactly what they claimed to be, or they could be something far more dangerous. He decided to proceed carefully but openly. The Zephyrian ships arrived 3 weeks later. They were massive vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls. The ships moved with grace that spoke of technology far beyond human capability. Jake watched from the Vanguard's observation deck as the alien flagship approached. It was both beautiful and terrifying. High Counselor Vexstar was the first alien Jake had ever seen. The Zephyrian stood nearly 8 feet tall with gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. 4 arms moved independently as Vexstar spoke through a translation device. His voice was deep and seemed genuinely friendly. The Zephyrians brought gifts of technology that made human scientists gasp in wonder. They offered power sources that could run entire cities for centuries, medical devices that could heal injuries in minutes, transportation systems that could move between star systems in days instead of months. It seemed too good to be true. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the colony ship UES Pioneer on the frontier world of New Alberta. She watched the first technology exchanges with growing amazement. The Zephyrians were patient teachers who seemed genuinely interested in helping humanity advance. Her colonists received new farming equipment that could grow crops in previously barren soil. Dr. Kevin Walsh remained cautious despite the obvious benefits. Something about the alien gifts troubled him, but he could not identify what. He spent long hours in his laboratory studying the Zephyrian technology. The devices were incredibly advanced, but they also contained components he did not understand. Hidden circuits that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Meanwhile, on the mining colony of Kepler 442b, Commander Ryan Blake noticed strange behavior from the Zephyrian observers. They spent most of their time studying human work patterns and industrial capabilities. They asked detailed questions about production rates and worker efficiency. They seemed particularly interested in how humans organized large-scale projects. The official meetings continued for months. Vexstar spoke of a galactic community where dozens of species worked together for mutual benefit. He painted pictures of vast trade networks and shared knowledge that could benefit everyone. Humanity would be welcomed as junior partners in this ancient alliance. Jake found himself wanting to believe every word. The Zephyrians offered everything humanity had dreamed of finding among the stars. They promised technology that could solve every problem Earth had ever faced. They offered knowledge that could advance human civilization by thousands of years. They seemed like the answer to every prayer, but Dr. Kevin Walsh kept finding troubling signs. The monitoring systems hidden in the alien gifts were more sophisticated than anything humans had developed. They could track individual humans across vast distances and record everything they said or did. When Kevin brought his concerns to Jake, the Admiral listened but chose to continue the negotiations. The breakthrough came when Sarah Miller, a communications officer aboard the research station Deep Space 7, intercepted a transmission between Zephyrian ships. The message was not meant for human ears, and the translation made Kevin's blood run cold. The Zephyrians were not discussing trade or cooperation. They were evaluating humanity as a potential slave species. The transmission spoke of human intelligence levels and physical capabilities. It discussed the best methods for controlling large human populations. It referenced previous species the Zephyrians had successfully enslaved and compared their characteristics to humanity. The message ended with a recommendation to proceed with the harvest operation. Kevin rushed the intelligence to Jake, who felt the universe shift around him. Everything the Zephyrians had said was a lie. The gifts were not gestures of friendship but tools of enslavement. The careful questions about human industry were not idle curiosity but military intelligence gathering. Humanity had walked directly into a trap that had been months in the making, and now the trap was about to close. The trap closed with devastating precision exactly 6 months after first contact. Massive Zephyrian warships appeared simultaneously around Earth and every human colony across 12 star systems. They had been cloaked and waiting in the darkness of space like predators watching their prey. The attack began at exactly the same moment everywhere, as if controlled by a single mind. Jake Morrison watched in horror from the bridge of the Vanguard as the alien fleet revealed itself around Earth. Hundreds of ships materialized from nothing, filling the space around humanity's homeworld. Each vessel was larger than anything in the human fleet and bristled with weapons that hurt the eyes to look at directly. The Zephyrian flagship that had seemed so peaceful just days before now showed its true nature. The alien weapons did not destroy as Jake had expected. Instead, they fired beams of pale blue energy that passed through ship hulls like they were made of paper. Human crew members touched by the beams collapsed instantly, but they were not dead. They lay paralyzed and unconscious but still breathing. The Zephyrians wanted their slaves alive and undamaged on Earth. President Maria Rodriguez coordinated the desperate defense from deep underground bunkers beneath the capital. The surface blazed with alien fire as pacification weapons rained down from orbit. Military bases fell silent within hours as their defenders were rendered helpless by the strange energy beams. Cities became graveyards of the living as millions of humans lay unconscious in the streets. General Chris Martinez led the few ground forces that remained mobile, using equipment shielded in the deepest military bunkers. His soldiers moved through empty streets where alien landing craft deposited Zephyrian shock troops. The aliens moved efficiently through the cities, collecting unconscious humans like farmers harvesting crops. They sorted people by age and physical condition, loading the healthiest into transport vessels. In space, Jake rallied what remained of the human fleet, but the battle was hopeless from the start. Human weapons barely scratched the alien hulls, while Zephyrian pacification beams disabled entire crews with single shots. Ship after ship fell silent as their crews had collapsed at their stations. Jake ordered a fighting retreat, knowing that every minute bought time for someone somewhere to find a solution. Captain Lisa Hayes fought desperately to evacuate civilians from New Alberta as alien forces overwhelmed the colony defenses. Her ship, the UES Pioneer, was overloaded with refugees, but she refused to leave anyone behind. The Zephyrians herded the colonists like cattle, separating families and loading the strongest into their transport ships. Lisa managed to save 300 people, but thousands more were taken. Lieutenant Commander Beth Parker made her stand at the Titan shipyards where humanity built its largest vessels. She rigged the entire facility with explosives rather than let it fall into alien hands. The explosion lit up the solar system like a second sun and took 12 Zephyrian ships with it. Beth died with her finger on the detonator, but her sacrifice denied the aliens humanity's most advanced construction facility. The neural control implants came next. Captured humans were fitted with small devices that attached to the base of the skull. The implants were designed to make humans compliant and obedient, turning them into perfect slaves, who would work without question or complaint. The Zephyrians had used the same technique on dozens of other species across the galaxy, but humanity proved different than the aliens expected. On Mars, mining foreman Tony Garcia woke up in a Zephyrian processing facility with an implant freshly installed in his neck. The device hummed with alien energy, trying to rewrite his thoughts and emotions. Tony felt the implant pushing against his mind like a foreign presence trying to take control. Something in Tony's brain fought back. The implant, designed to dominate weaker minds, encountered human stubbornness and willpower that it could not overcome. Tony discovered he could resist the device's influence through pure determination and anger. More importantly, he found he could help others do the same by talking them through the process of mental resistance. Word spread through the prison facilities that humans could fight the implants. Captured colonists and soldiers began teaching each other techniques for maintaining mental independence. The Zephyrians noticed the resistance but could not understand how their proven technology was failing. They increased the implant power levels, but human minds simply adapted and grew stronger. Tony organized the first prisoner revolt using nothing but kitchen utensils and maintenance tools. The Zephyrians had grown careless, believing their slaves were completely under control. Tony and his team overpowered the guards and seized weapons from the facility armory. They broadcasted instructions for resistance to every prison camp on Mars. The Zephyrians responded with overwhelming force, crushing the Mars rebellion within days, but the damage was done. Humans across the galaxy had learned they could fight back against the implants. More importantly, they had learned that their captors were not invincible. Every successful act of defiance spread hope and knowledge to other prison camps. Dr. Kevin Walsh found himself in a research facility where the Zephyrians forced human scientists to work on improving their technology. The aliens wanted to use human creativity to solve problems their own rigid thinking could not handle. Kevin pretended to cooperate while secretly studying his captors and their weaknesses. The surviving human fleets scattered to the outer systems, where Admiral Morrison established hidden bases in asteroid fields and nebulae. The Zephyrians controlled the major colonies, but they could not find every human ship in the vast emptiness of space. Morrison began planning a resistance movement using the few resources that remained free. Captain Diana West escaped the initial attack by being in deep space when the trap was sprung. She gathered other survivors and began attacking isolated Zephyrian supply convoys. Her ship, the UES Defiance, became a symbol of human resistance, proving that not all of humanity had been captured or broken. The Zephyrians expected their conquest to be complete within a year, as it had been with every previous species. They established processing centers on every human world and began shipping slaves to other parts of their empire. But something was different this time. The humans kept fighting even after defeat. They refused to accept their fate as slaves. Reports came in from across the galaxy of escape attempts, sabotage, and outright rebellion in the prison camps. The Zephyrians increased security but could not stop the growing resistance. Human prisoners helped each other resist the neural implants and taught survival skills to newly captured groups. What should have been a simple harvest operation was becoming something far more complicated. High Counselor Vexstar studied the reports with growing concern. No species had ever shown this level of resistance to Zephyrian control technology. Most alien races accepted their fate within weeks of capture, becoming model slaves who worked without complaint. But humans seemed to grow more defiant with each passing day, creating problems the Confederacy had never faced before. 1 year after the Great Betrayal, human resistance networks spread like wildfire across the galaxy. What the Zephyrians had expected to be a simple slave harvest had become their worst nightmare. Every human world now hosted underground movements that struck at alien targets with increasing skill and coordination. The conquered had become the hunters. Dr. Amy Foster led a scientific resistance cell deep beneath the ruins of Chicago. Her laboratory was hidden in abandoned subway tunnels, where alien scanners could not detect human activity. Amy and her team worked day and night to reverse engineer Zephyrian technology using salvaged equipment and captured alien devices. They discovered that human minds processed information in ways the aliens had never encountered. The Zephyrians built their technology around rigid mathematical principles that worked perfectly for their ordered society. But human creativity and chaotic thinking patterns could find solutions that alien logic could never reach. Amy's team developed new weapons by combining Zephyrian power sources with human engineering in ways that violated every rule of alien physics. Colonel Sam Turner coordinated guerrilla operations across 3 star systems, using a network of hidden communication relays. Sam had been a Special Forces officer before the invasion and knew how to fight against superior enemies. He taught human resistance fighters to think like their alien oppressors and then do exactly what the Zephyrians would never expect. The aliens followed predictable patterns based on their rigid military doctrine. They expected enemies to behave logically and follow established tactical principles. But humans excelled at breaking rules and creating chaos where order was expected. Sam's fighters hit supply convoys at impossible times and places, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. On the occupied world of Haven Colony, former engineer Rachel Stone had turned the Zephyrian mining operation into a nightmare of mechanical failures and production delays. Rachel understood industrial systems better than anyone, and she used that knowledge to create subtle sabotage that looked like random equipment failures. The aliens replaced parts and brought in new machinery, but the problems continued. Rachel had recruited dozens of human workers who had learned to fool the neural implants while maintaining their positions in the alien operation. They followed orders during the day but spent their nights destroying equipment and stealing supplies. The Zephyrians increased security but could not identify the source of their problems because the sabotage came from within their own workforce, the aliens. Rigid hierarchical thinking could not adapt to human tactical flexibility and innovation. Every Zephyrian response to human resistance was predictable and methodical. Human fighters learned to anticipate alien reactions and turn them into traps. What should have been overwhelming technological superiority became a disadvantage when facing an enemy that refused to follow any rules. Captain Diana West had built a hidden fleet in the Outer Rim territories using salvaged alien technology and human engineering ingenuity. Her original ship, the UES Defiance, had been joined by dozens of vessels constructed in secret asteroid bases. Each ship was unique, combining Zephyrian components with human modifications that created capabilities neither species could achieve alone. Diana's fleet included former merchant marine officer Kyle Brown, who had become a master of hit and run tactics. Kyle commanded a squadron of fast attack ships that struck at Zephyrian supply lines and vanished into asteroid fields before the aliens could respond. His ship, the Stinger, carried weapons that fired human ammunition powered by alien energy sources. Ace pilot Jenny Quinn led the fighter squadrons that protected the hidden fleet from Zephyrian patrols. Jenny had discovered that human reflexes and intuition gave her advantages over alien pilots who relied too heavily on computer assistance. Her fighters used modified Zephyrian engines but retained human control systems that allowed for impossible maneuvers. The Resistance made a discovery that changed everything. When they contacted other enslaved species across the galaxy, Dr. Kevin Walsh managed to communicate with alien prisoners in his research facility and learned the true scope of Zephyrian operations. The Confederacy had enslaved 47 different species over the past 1,000 years, but none had ever mounted effective resistance. Most alien species accepted their fate within months of conquest, becoming compliant workers who caused no trouble for their masters. The Zephyrians had perfected their system over centuries of practice and had never encountered a species like humanity. The neural implants worked perfectly on other aliens because they did not possess the stubborn independence that defined human nature. Kevin discovered that other enslaved species were watching the human rebellion with amazement and growing hope. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone was fighting back against the Zephyrian Empire and winning battles. Word of human victory spread through the slave networks, inspiring other species to attempt their own acts of defiance. The Zephyrians found themselves facing rebellions on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries. Alien slaves who had been model workers for generations suddenly began refusing orders and sabotaging equipment. The Confederacy's perfect system of control was breaking down because humanity had shown that resistance was possible on Earth. President Maria Rodriguez coordinated the global resistance from a series of underground bunkers, connected by pre-war transportation tunnels. Maria had transformed from a peacetime politician into a wartime leader who understood that humanity's survival depended on making the occupation too expensive for the aliens to maintain. Maria's government issued new identity papers to resistance fighters and coordinated supply networks that kept human rebels equipped with weapons and equipment. Most importantly, she maintained communication with resistance cells across the galaxy, ensuring that every human group knew they were part of a larger war effort. The alien command structure began showing signs of strain as reports flooded in from across their empire. Zephyrian commanders who had never faced serious resistance found themselves dealing with problems they did not understand. Their training had prepared them to manage compliant slaves, not fight determined guerrilla warriors. High Counselor Vextar called emergency meetings with his military advisors, trying to understand how a simple slave harvest had become a galaxy-wide crisis. The Zephyrians had overwhelming technological superiority and controlled all major human worlds, but they could not eliminate the resistance. Every victory against human fighters seemed to create two new rebel cells. The Confederacy's greatest weakness was their inability to understand human psychology. They viewed the resistance as an irrational response to inevitable defeat rather than recognizing it as humanity's defining characteristic. The aliens expected logic and submission but received defiance and creativity that grew stronger with each passing day. Commander Ryan Blake escaped from the prison camp on Kepler 442b and established a hidden base in the planet's extensive cave systems. Ryan's fighters specialized in attacking Zephyrian communication networks, leaving alien commanders blind and unable to coordinate their responses to resistance activities. His team included former communications officers who understood alien technology better than its creators. The resistance discovered that Zephyrian society was built around absolute order with no tolerance for chaos or unpredictability. Human fighters learned to create maximum disruption with minimum resources, forcing the aliens to waste enormous amounts of time and energy responding to threats that barely existed. A single human with knowledge of alien systems could tie up hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers for days. As the first year of occupation ended, the balance of power was shifting in ways neither species had anticipated. The Zephyrians still controlled the major population centers, but their grip was weakening with each successful resistance operation. More importantly, humanity had proven that the alien empire was not invincible and that knowledge was spreading to every enslaved species in the galaxy. 3 years into the conflict, humanity had transformed from scattered refugees into something the galaxy had never seen before. What the Zephyrians had dismissed as primitive resistance had evolved into a sophisticated war machine that combined alien technology with human ruthlessness in ways that terrified their former captors. The hunters had become the hunted. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship hidden deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The Zephyrians believed he had died in the initial attacks, but Jake had been building something in the darkness of space. His fleet had grown from a handful of survivors to over 300 warships, each more dangerous than anything in the original human navy. The hidden shipyards operated around the clock as human engineers combined salvaged Zephyrian technology with their own innovations. Every captured alien component was studied, reverse-engineered, and improved upon until it exceeded its original capabilities. Human creativity had taken alien perfection and made it deadlier than its creators ever imagined. Jake's fleet represented a new kind of warfare that the galaxy had never experienced. The ships moved with Zephyrian speed but fought with human unpredictability. They carried weapons that fired alien energy powered by human hatred. Most importantly, they were crewed by veterans who had learned that showing mercy to slavers was the same as betraying every human who had died in chains. Operation Payback began at dawn on the third anniversary of the invasion. Jake's fleet emerged from hiding and struck simultaneously at 12 Zephyrian military installations across 4 star systems. The attacks were coordinated with precision that would have impressed alien commanders, if any, had survived to appreciate the tactical brilliance. The first target was the Zephyrian fortress world of Kepler Prime, where the aliens had established their regional command center. Captain Bobby Harris led the assault with a battle group of 50 ships that moved through the alien defenses like wolves among sheep. The Zephyrians had grown comfortable in their superiority and were unprepared for an enemy that had learned to fight as dirty as they did. Bobby's ships used human tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They targeted civilian infrastructure to create panic among the alien population. They executed captured Zephyrian officers instead of taking prisoners. They showed the same mercy that humanity had received during the invasion, which was none. At all. The battle became a massacre as human forces demonstrated what 3 years of slavery had taught them about the value of alien lives. Zephyrian ships tried to flee but found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had anticipated every possible response. The aliens who had come to harvest slaves discovered that their prey had developed a taste for revenge on the industrial world of New Pittsburgh factory supervisor Helen Davis oversaw the mass production of hybrid human-alien weapons that rolled off assembly lines 24 hours a day. Helen had learned Zephyrian manufacturing techniques during her time in the prison camps and now used that knowledge to create weapons designed specifically to kill her former captors. The factories combined human industrial efficiency with alien technology to create a production system that the Zephyrians could not match. Human workers, motivated by hatred and a desire for freedom, produced equipment faster than alien slaves who worked only because they had no choice. Quality improved as human engineers made modifications that alien designers had never considered. Helen's weapons were distributed to resistance cells across the galaxy through a supply network that the Zephyrians could not intercept. Every human fighter received equipment that was superior to what the aliens used themselves. The former slaves were now better armed than their former masters, and they knew exactly how to use their advantages. The Zephyrian military command began receiving reports that challenged everything they believed about warfare and technology. Human forces were using alien equipment in ways that should have been impossible. Their weapons performed beyond design specifications. Their ships moved faster than physics allowed. Their tactics defied every principle of military logic. Counselor Vexstar studied intelligence reports that describe human fighters as demons, who showed no fear of death and no mercy toward the defeated. Zephyrian soldiers were refusing to engage human forces in close combat after stories spread of aliens who surrendered being executed on the spot. The humans had learned that terror was as effective as any weapon. Dr. Amy Foster's research teams had made breakthroughs that revolutionized human understanding of alien technology. Amy discovered that Zephyrian devices were limited by their creators' rigid thinking patterns. Human minds could see possibilities that alien logic dismissed as impossible and used those insights to exceed design limitations. The most important discovery was that alien neural implants could be reversed and reprogrammed. Amy's team developed techniques for turning the control devices into weapons that allowed humans to influence Zephyrian thoughts and emotions. The tools of enslavement became instruments of liberation as human fighters learned to turn alien technology against its creators. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded a battle group that specialized in liberating prison camps and slave processing facilities. Lisa's ships arrived like avenging angels, bringing freedom to humans who had given up hope of rescue. But liberation came with a price that the Zephyrians paid in blood for every human who had suffered in their camps. Lisa's forces showed alien guards the same consideration they had shown to human prisoners. The liberation operations became executions, as human soldiers worked through the camps, eliminating every Zephyrian they found. Lisa personally executed camp commanders who had overseen the torture and death of human prisoners, ensuring that justice was delivered by human hands. The psychological impact on Zephyrian society was devastating as reports reached the homeworld of humans who fought like berserkers and showed no mercy to defeated enemies. The aliens had expected to face desperate resistance that would eventually collapse under superior firepower. Instead, they encountered an enemy that grew stronger and more vicious with each battle. Commander Ryan Blake led raids against Zephyrian supply convoys that left no survivors and no witnesses. Ryan's fighters had learned that living aliens could report human positions and capabilities to their commanders. Dead aliens could tell no tales and spread no intelligence, which made them preferable to prisoners who might escape or be rescued. The galaxy began to take notice as other enslaved species watched human forces tear through Zephyrian defenses like they were made of paper. Word spread through the slave networks that humanity was winning battles and killing aliens who had seemed invincible. The impossible was happening, and other species began to believe that freedom might be possible. Dr. Kevin Walsh escaped from his research facility during a human raid and brought with him complete technical specifications for Zephyrian military equipment. Kevin's intelligence allowed human engineers to identify weaknesses in alien technology that could be exploited in battle. Every Zephyrian advantage was studied and countered by human ingenuity. The resistance had evolved into something far beyond what the Zephyrians had expected when they first attacked humanity. The scattered survivors had become a unified military force that combined superior technology with absolutely ruthless tactics. They fought not just for victory, but for revenge against every alien who had participated in the enslavement of their species. As the third year of war ended, the Zephyrians faced a crisis that threatened the foundation of their empire. Human forces controlled entire star systems and were advancing toward the Confederacy's core worlds. More importantly, other enslaved species were beginning their own rebellions, inspired by human success and supported by human weapons and tactics. The slaves had become masters of war, and their former owners were learning that the price of enslavement was higher than they had ever imagined. Humanity had given the galaxy a new definition of warfare that would echo through history as the day when the oppressed rose up and showed their oppressors exactly what they had created through centuries of cruelty and exploitation. 5 years after the invasion, humanity had become the nightmare that haunted every Zephyrian's. What began as a simple slave harvest had exploded into a galaxy-wide revolution that threatened to destroy an empire built over 1,000 years of conquest. The former victims had become avengers whose appetite for destruction seemed to grow with each victory. General Alex Stone commanded the Human Liberation Fleet from his flagship, the UES Revenge, as it carved a path of destruction through the heart of Zephyrian space. Alex was Rachel Stone's brother and had watched his sister die during the liberation of Haven Colony. Her death had transformed him from a careful military strategist into something far more dangerous, a human who understood that mercy was weakness when fighting slavers. The Liberation Fleet had grown to over 1,000 ships crewed by humans who had learned warfare in the hardest school possible. They were former slaves, former prisoners, and former victims who had been forged into weapons by years of suffering under alien rule. Each crew member carried personal reasons for hatred that made them more dangerous than any professional soldier. Alex's campaign followed a simple strategy that maximized alien suffering while minimizing human losses. Every Zephyrian military installation was destroyed completely with no survivors left to report human capabilities. Every alien colony was given a choice between immediate surrender and total annihilation. Those who chose to fight learned that humanity had no patience for prolonged sieges. The siege of Rigel 7 became legendary throughout the galaxy as an example of human ruthlessness taken to its logical conclusion. The Zephyrian garrison refused surrender and prepared for a heroic last stand against the human invaders. Alex Stone gave them exactly what they wanted by turning their heroic stand into a funeral pyre that could be seen from orbit. Human weapons had evolved far beyond anything the Zephyrians could counter. Quantum disruption bombs tore apart alien ships at the molecular level. Plasma cannons fired streams of energy that burned through any known armor. Most terrible of all were the neural cascade weapons that attacked alien minds directly causing madness and death without touching their physical bodies. On the Zephyrian homeworld intelligence operative Casey, Mills led a network of freed slaves and striking at the heart of the Empire. Casey had spent 2 years infiltrating alien society using modified neural implants that made her appear to be a loyal slave, while remaining completely human in her thoughts and motivations. Casey's network included members of every species the Zephyrians had enslaved over the past millennium. The diverse group shared only one common goal: the complete destruction of the Confederacy and everyone who had participated in their enslavement. They moved through Zephyrian cities, like ghosts leaving death and destruction in their wake. The revelation that humans had not only reached the homeworld but turned other slave species into allies sent shockwaves through Zephyrian society. The aliens had believed their homeworld was safely beyond human reach, protected by layers of military defenses and vast distances. The discovery that enemy agents walked among them created panic that paralyzed the government. Dr. Paul Carter worked with resistance science teams to perfect quantum disruption weapons specifically designed to destroy Zephyrian neural implant technology. Paul's weapons could free entire slave populations with a single activation, creating instant armies of liberated aliens who turned against their former masters with the fury of the long oppressed. The weapons were deployed simultaneously across 47 worlds where the Zephyrians maintained slave populations. Millions of aliens who had been docile workers for centuries suddenly remembered what freedom felt like and decided to take revenge for decades of suffering. The Empire's own slaves became its destroyers as neural implants failed across the galaxy. Captain Michelle Woods led the assault on the primary Zephyrian fleet base at Volf 359, where the aliens maintained their largest military installation outside the homeworld. Michelle's battle group included ships from 6 different liberated species, each contributing unique capabilities to the combined assault force. The battle demonstrated how far human military thinking had evolved since the invasion. Michelle's forces used psychological warfare that drove alien defenders to madness before the shooting even started. They'd broadcast recordings of Zephyrian screams from previous battles while jamming all enemy communications to create maximum confusion and terror. The Zephyrian fleet tried to escape when it became clear that their base could not be defended, but found their retreat cut off by human ships that had anticipated every possible response. The aliens who had once hunted humans across the galaxy discovered what it felt like to be trapped by a superior enemy with no intention of showing mercy. Commander Peter Lynch coordinated the siege of the Zephyrian Central Command world, where the Confederacy maintained its military headquarters and primary training facilities. Peter's forces surrounded the planet with over 200 ships while broadcasting demands for unconditional surrender on all frequencies. The aliens responded with defiance that cost them everything they had left. Peter's siege weapons reduced their cities to ash while his fighters eliminated every ship that tried to break through the blockade. The command world that had coordinated the enslavement of dozens of species became a monument to the consequences of underestimating human determination. The Zephyrians found themselves facing complete annihilation as their military forces collapsed under the weight of human assault. Colonies that had existed for centuries were evacuated or destroyed. Military installations that had seemed impregnable fell to human forces that fought with equipment superior to anything in the alien arsenal. Most importantly, the Empire's foundation was crumbling as enslaved species across the galaxy rose up in rebellion. The network of slave labor that had powered Zephyrian civilization for a millennium turned against its masters with human weapons and human tactical knowledge. The oppressors were learning what their victims had endured for so many years. High Counselor Vextar made increasingly desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of peace settlement that would save his species from extinction. He offered to return all human prisoners and abandon all claims to human territory. He promised reparations and formal recognition of human independence. He begged for mercy from the same species he had tried to enslave, but humanity had learned the hard lesson of alien treachery and refused all negotiations. President Maria Rodriguez spoke for all mankind. when she declared that the only acceptable outcome was the complete destruction of the Zephyrian Confederacy, and everyone who had participated in the enslavement of other species, the tide had turned so completely that Zephyrian military commanders began surrendering entire fleets rather than face human forces in battle. Stories of human ruthlessness had spread throughout alien society, creating a terror that paralyzed military effectiveness. Soldiers who had once believed in their superiority now fought only because they feared human revenge more than death. Dr. Amy Foster's research teams had perfected technologies that made human forces nearly invincible in battle. Adaptive armor that repaired itself faster than enemy weapons could damage it. Stealth systems that made human ships invisible to alien sensors. Most importantly, they had cracked the genetic code that controlled Zephyrian biology, allowing them to create biological weapons targeted specifically at their former captors. The galaxy watched in amazement, as the species that had seemed most vulnerable to enslavement systematically destroyed an empire that had ruled for 1,000 years. Human forces moved from victory to victory with an efficiency that impressed even their allies among the liberated species. The former slaves had become the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. As the fifth year of war drew to a close, the Zephyrian Confederacy existed only as scattered refugee fleets fleeing toward the galactic rim. Their homeworld was under siege, their colonies were in human hands, and their former slaves had turned the galaxy against them. The harvest of humanity had become the harvest of the harvesters, and the final reckoning was approaching. 7 years after first contact, the war reached its inevitable conclusion above the gray skies of the Zephyrian homeworld. A planet that had once been the center of a galactic empire now cowered beneath the guns of humanity's greatest fleet. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, a massive dreadnought built from the remains of alien technology and human determination, watching as the final act of this cosmic drama unfolded. The Zephyrian Confederacy had been reduced to a handful of refugee ships hiding in the shadow of their dying world. Their colonies lay in ruins across 47 star systems. Their slave networks had collapsed as liberated species turned against their former masters with weapons provided by human engineers. The mighty empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years had been brought to its knees by the species they had tried to harvest. President Maria Rodriguez addressed the galaxy from the bridge of the Retribution, her words carried to every inhabited world by a communication network built from captured alien technology. Maria had aged decades in the 7 years since the invasion, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had led her species through its darkest hour and emerged victorious. The speech became legendary across the galaxy as Maria spoke not just for humanity, but for every species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of history behind them. The galaxy would remember this moment as the day when victims became victors and the oppressed rose up to judge their oppressors. Maria explained that humanity had come to the Zephyrian homeworld not as conquerors but as liberators. They brought freedom to the alien slaves who had served the Confederacy for centuries. They offered justice to the countless species who had been crushed beneath the weight of Zephyrian expansion. Most importantly, they carried a message that would echo through history. The message was that no species had the right to enslave another regardless of their technological superiority or military might. The galaxy had operated under different rules for millennia, with the strong taking what they wanted from the weak. Humanity had changed those rules forever by proving that victims could become victors if they refused to accept their fate. High Counselor Vextar emerged from the ruins of his capital city carrying a white banner of surrender. The once proud leader of the Confederacy was now a broken figure whose empire had crumbled around him. He came before the human fleet not as a conqueror demanding tribute, but as a defeated enemy begging for mercy. Jake Morrison received the Zephyrian surrender aboard the Retribution, surrounded by representatives of every species the aliens had enslaved. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy so that everyone could witness the moment when the hunters became the hunted, and the masters became the servants. The terms of surrender were non-negotiable, and Jake delivered them with the cold precision of someone who had learned warfare in the hardest school possible. The Zephyrian Confederacy would be dissolved immediately and completely. Old slave-taking infrastructure would be dismantled under human supervision. Reparations would be paid to every enslaved species for the suffering they had endured. Most importantly, the Zephyrians themselves would serve a period of supervised rehabilitation to ensure they never again threatened the freedom of other species. They would learn what their victims had experienced by working under the same conditions they had imposed on others. Justice would be served by making the oppressors understand the true cost of oppression. Vex single quotes Tar finally understood the magnitude of his species' error as he signed the surrender documents. The Zephyrians had believed they were harvesting a weak species that would submit to superior force. Instead, they had awakened something in humanity that transformed them from peaceful explorers into the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. The final battle had been a foregone conclusion once human forces reached the homeworld. Zephyrian defenses that had protected the planet for centuries crumbled within hours under the assault of weapons that exceeded alien technology in every category. The battle was less a military engagement than an execution carried out with ruthless efficiency. Dr. Amy Foster supervised the dismantling of Zephyrian slave control technology, ensuring that the neural implants and pacification weapons could never again be used to rob other species of their freedom. Amy's teams worked methodically through alien research facilities, destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge about techniques for controlling unwilling populations. The liberation of enslaved species proceeded simultaneously across the galaxy, as human forces freed every prison camp and processing facility in Zephyrian space. Captain Lisa Hayes led the liberation fleets that brought freedom to beings who had known only slavery for generations. The rescued populations included species that had been enslaved so long they had forgotten their own names, but liberation came with responsibility, and humanity accepted the burden of rebuilding what the Zephyrians had destroyed. The newly freed species needed time to recover from centuries of oppression. They needed protection from other potential conquerors. Most importantly, they needed proof that freedom was possible and worth fighting for. The Galactic Liberation Alliance was established with humanity at its head, not because they sought power, but because they had proven their commitment to freedom through blood and sacrifice. The Alliance Charter was simple in its language, but revolutionary in its implications. Never again would any species be allowed to enslave another. The Alliance military was built around human tactical doctrine and equipped with hybrid technology that combined the best innovations from dozens of different species. But its real strength came from the shared commitment of its members to defend freedom wherever it was threatened. The former slaves had become the guardians of galactic liberty. Dr. Kevin Walsh became the first director of Alliance Sciences, overseeing research programs that focused on improving life for all member species rather than creating weapons of conquest. Kevin's laboratories developed medical technology that could heal the psychological wounds left by centuries of slavery. They created agricultural techniques that could feed growing populations without depleting planetary resources. The transformation of galactic civilization was complete within a decade as the Alliance model spread to every inhabited system. Species that had lived in fear of stronger neighbors found protection under Alliance guarantees. Worlds that had been stripped bare by Zephyrian exploitation were restored to their former glory through Alliance terraforming projects. Children of dozens of species played together on New Earth, the Alliance capital world, while human veterans stood guard as eternal sentinels. The guards were reminders of the price of freedom and the cost of allowing oppression to take root anywhere in the galaxy. They carried weapons, but more importantly, they carried memories of what had been lost and what had been won. The final scene of the great drama played out in the Alliance Council chambers, where representatives of 53 species worked together to solve problems that had once seemed impossible. They debated and argued and disagreed, but they did so as equals united by their commitment to freedom and justice. Jake Morrison retired from active duty but remained as an advisor to young officers who would never know the terror of alien conquest. He spent his final years teaching the lessons learned in humanity's darkest hour, ensuring that future generations would be ready if freedom was ever again threatened by those who mistook kindness for weakness. The galaxy had learned that humans were capable of both great compassion and terrible vengeance. They could be the best friends and the worst enemies any species might encounter. But most importantly, they had proven that the capacity for war could serve the cause of peace, when wielded by those who understood that freedom was worth any price and any sacrifice.